Hello, class. This is chapter 41, a video lecture entitled Personal Soundtracks, Berlioz, and the Program Symphony. I'm going to start the whiteboard. If you don't mind. And remember, this is the genre on program music. And so we looked at the invention of opera, right? And we said the Baroque period. And we listened to Vivaldi. And the classical period, 1750, the death of Bach, to 1825, right? Remember, they use a different date going up, and the starting one is 1820. But this is the classical period. And in this textbook, there is no program music that's offered from the classical period. Well, makes sense because the classical period was all about absolute music, which we'll do in another swing through the periods. But here we are now, and it's very important that we know this is 1900, right? And this is the Romantic style period. And then we actually will, in this swing through, sample some music from the 20th century and beyond, right? And so that's the present. So there we have it. But we're going to focus in this chapter on, and the next chapter also, on the Romantic period. So I'm going to start the PowerPoint for chapter 41. And this is actually a long chapter because there's a lot of information and it's worth going over. It's a very important piece of music, and it's a great piece of music, of course. So in regards to the Romantic period, 1820-1900, remember when we did the swing through on secular song, we listened to Franz Schubert, and right around this period of time, he did that Lieder, and very typical program music, but a different genre. Now, many Romantic composers cultivated program music. What is that? Instrumental music with a literary or pictorial association supplied by the composer, as compared to absolute music, which was the style period before was very popular. And we're going to sample Hector Berlioz' Symphonie Fantastique, and it is a fantastic symphony. It's a 5-movement program symphony, which is a kind of program music unified by a recurring theme, and it's called an idée fixe, which means a fixed idea, literally translated. I guess that's French, that represents the composer's beloved. It's a fantastic story about this man's infatuation with a woman. And here we go. Regarding Romantic music, right? 4 main Romantic era expressive trends. 1, the Romantic era was fascinated by extreme emotional states, and that goes back to the Franz Schubert, the Erlkönig. Remember, with the man riding through the forest with his sick child with him, right? Extreme emotional states. Another Romantic era trend is nationalism, where you write a piece of music that's about your country, people proud about it. It's not necessarily about patriotism as nationalism. It's like there's a famous road in Italy made by the Romans. It's called the Appian Way. So they wrote a piece of music about that Appian Way, and suddenly we call it nationalism. And the flip side of this, and we're going to encounter this several times in the remainder part of this course, is exoticism, where you focus on the culture of another country rather than your country. So I'm in Italy and I'm an Italian composer, but I write an opera that takes place in Egypt because the people in Italy are curious about Egypt. So this is exoticism. Also, the Romantic era was fascinated by nature, right? Of course, because of the Industrial Revolution, Many people are working in cities and factories, and pastoral stories have a lot of appeal. There's magazines and books that are about that take place in exotic places, right? Or just about nature itself, right? The Romantic era had a fascination with the macabre and the Gothic and the supernatural, the spooky stuff. And Romantic is really very much like we are today. Okay, regarding the form, right? We're not going to sample so much in this chapter, but miniatures, right? Whiffs of emotion concentrated in one movement. As an example, come back to that Franz Schubert Lied, right? Those are examples of miniatures. And when we go into the piano genre, we're going to hear miniatures from this period of time. Not in this chapter. And then there are grandiose compositions, which is kind of like what this one is. Not any examples in the book of pieces that require many musicians, pieces that require hundreds of singers or 100 grand pianos, etc. And then another example of the form is program music, right? Is much more popular than absolute music during this period. And the use of cyclical material to provide structural unity. We're going to run across this word many times, cyclical, a cycle, right? And what it is basically how to assemble miniatures, one movement compositions into a larger work, and you do this with a unifying idea. Example, you have a song cycle where I could write a song about my girlfriend, or I could write 8 songs about women. You know, one would be about my girlfriends, one would be about my mom, one about my sister, right? And they'd all have a different kind of an attitude. But altogether, we would say it was a song cycle, and then united by a common topic. And then you could have a symphonic poem cycle, right? Just a symphonic poem is a one movement piece of music, but you could have multiple put together because it's all tied together by some kind of idea. And then, of course, miniature piano pieces unified into the cycle of miniature piano pieces. So it's funny because they have the idea we want to have just one little whiff of emotion, but then we tie them together and call it's a cycle. So we'll encounter this many times. Here are 4 types of program music, and we're going to actually sample the program symphony, which is a whole symphony that tells one story, right? And a concert overture and a symphonic poem are similar in that there are one movement pieces. And the difference between the symphonic poem and a concert overture is a concert overture is really tied to the form. And so the shape of the sections are very important to tell the story, whereas symphonic poem, the story itself dictates the shape of the piece of music, right? Difference between the concert overture and the symphonic poem is subtle. Both are one movement. The concert overture is more tied to the form, like sonata allegro form, which we will talk in detail about that when we do the next swing through on the genre of absolute music. And symphonic poem is more tied to telling the story, and that constitutes the form. And then there is incidental music, another kind of program music, that's performed between the acts of a play. And it's incidental because you don't need the music to perform the play. It's incidental, right? It's like you get all dressed up and you have your suit and tie on, and they said, well, don't you want to put a tie tack on? It's like, well, that's just incidental. It's nice, but I don't really need it. And so that's the way incidental music is. It's performed between the acts of a play and not during the acts of a play. So again, what is program music? Program music is instrumental music with literary or pictorial associations. Of course, we heard that in Vivaldi's Spring. It was about spring. So the program or the storyline is supplied by the composer, and the program is indicated in the title or explanatory notes. I could just have a piece of music, and if I call it Snowflakes, just one movement, you're going to expect something that's going to make you have an impression of snowflakes. So just the title alone could make that piece of music program music. And generally, pieces of music that are absolute music, right, where there's no storyline, the piece might be called Allegro. That's it. And what does Allegro mean? It means fast. So that's all you're supposed to expect, is that it's not going to be slow. It's going to be fast. And if it was going to be slow, I would call it andante or largo or something like that. So that's a typical example of the difference between program music and absolute music. Frequently, these works of the program music relate to moral issues or political issues, right? I could write a piece about called the 1812 Overture, which is about the victory over Napoleon's brother, military victory, or Wellington's victory by Beethoven. Again, or I could write a piece of music that is trying to make you feel something that's going on, like the Franz Schubert Erlkönig. And Romantic period, 1820 to 1900, the program music is the dominant popular piece of music as opposed to absolute music. There is absolute music written, but it doesn't have a, it's less than the program music. Now, Hector Berlioz, okay, this very interesting character. The story of Hector Berlioz and his Symphonie Fantastique is simply amazing, although it is just one movement of the five. Oh, this is the example 32, right? So just one movement of the five movements. The Symphonie Fantastique is the first program symphony. So typically a symphony, which we'll learn when we go through the absolute music, has four movements: a fast movement, a slow movement, a dance movement, and a fast movement. But the program symphony, this one has five movements. To sum it up, right, Berlioz, while a student, he won the Prix de Rome for his composition of Symphonie Fantastique. And remember, the Prix de Rome, we listened to in the first swing a piece by Boulanger, right? I can't remember what her first name was. Her sister was Nadia, and she had won the Prix de Rome, right? This award given to a French student in composition and allows them to go study in Rome for, I think, 2 years. So Berlioz won the Prix de Rome for this piece of music he wrote called the Symphonie Fantastique. And he had the nerve to call his own piece of music a fantastic symphony, which it is. So this program symphony is based on an imaginary encounter with an actress he had seen a number of times on stage. Because Shakespearean plays were very popular at the time. Of course, Shakespeare lived in the 1500s, but here we are in the 1800s, and it's popular entertainment to see Shakespearean plays. So Berlioz uses one. This is really the music part of it. That he uses one music theme, and the structure we call the idée fixe, fixed idea. A melody that appears in all five movements, and it represents the actress that he's infatuated with. Each time this theme appears, it is orchestrated and presented unique to other presentations to tell the story. So it appears in all the five movements, usually only about once, but each time the melody is dressed up in a different way. Curiously, he eventually marries this actress. Their marriage doesn't last. And this idée fixe is an important structure in music history. That's one of the reasons why we studied this piece of music. Here is a painting, and you would say this is a romantic painting, right? It's like not real stuff in a way. Nature, something is spooky about it, and the dark clouds. This is typical romantic period. The ideas of the romantic period were sometimes far-fetched, right? And this was an unsuccessful musical instrument invented by Adolphe Sax, although the same man invented another instrument that was very successful, named after him, and the instrument is the saxophone. Pianos were developing and getting larger. Remember that actually the first pianos were not really in practice until near the end of Mozart's life. Remember, but Mozart died in 1791, and here we're in the 1800s now, and the pianos are getting larger and louder. Here is a satire engraving from 1846. Hector Berlioz is a very interesting man. Okay, of course he's French, and again, the French want to do stuff French. They don't want to do it any place, we can confusing that it might be considered Italian or German. He was not a virtuoso musician, as many times are the case with successful musicians. Matter of fact, he was went to study medicine at medical school on his parents' wishes, and he kind of wanted to study music. And he basically dropped out of medical school and convinced his parents that he should study music, which he did. So again, this actress he's infatuated is Harriet Smithson. And then he was born in 1803, so at age 27 is when he won the Prix de Rome to study in Italy. He is a master of orchestration. Okay, the word orchestration means it means like if you write a melody on a piano or a piece of music on the piano, then you decide what instruments in the orchestra would play those parts, right? Am I going to have the strings play that, or should I have the tubas play that, or should I have a violin and a oboe play it together to get different sounds? This is called orchestration, and they teach this in college. I had a course in college called orchestration. And it's like a painter using different colors of paint and putting together and deciding. And you can be very creative and original with orchestration. Incidentally, he wrote a book about orchestration, which is still used in universities today. So what did he write? He wrote orchestral overtures, Berlioz, program symphonies. He wrote choral music, 3 operas, and he was a writer about music. He was a critique, and actually one of the first musicians that was hired to attend different cities as a visiting conductor. This is very common in our time for conductors to go and conduct one concert and work with the musicians a short period of time to put on a concert. Berlioz did that. He was a very interesting man, kind of full of himself in a lot of ways, but a great way with words. Here is the Harriet Smithson, which he was didn't even know her, but he wrote this piece of music about her. And again, it's so curious that later he did marry her, but wasn't successful in marriage. I want you to watch a little bit of this because it's a documentary by Tony Palmer. And Tony Palmer has done I think over 100 documentaries, and you probably have seen one of them. But this one is over an hour, and we're just going to watch a few minutes of it for 2 reasons. The whole documentation, the documentary is only Berlioz's words, because he sent a lot of letters and he wrote in newspapers and magazines. We have a lot of his words to look at. And so these are just his words, and they're said by an actor. And while this is going on, there's a piece of music that he wrote, and it's for solo voice and strings. And the point is, it's very unusual, and this is typical of Berlioz, because he orchestrates this with the strings in a very low range, and it creates a certain mood that is very cool. Anyway, here, let's listen to this few minutes of words spoken by or written by Berlioz and spoken by an actor, and this piece of music.
I was 24 when I first beheld Harriet Smithson at the Théâtre de l'Odéon, an actress, Irish, playing Ophelia in a visiting troupe of the great Shakespearean tragedy. I wrote songs for her, even a symphony. But she would have none of me. I wrote an opera, imagining her as my heroine, Marguerite, in my Faust. I wrote her letters. She sent them back. True, I then fell in love with another, a pianist, Maria Moca. Even promised to marry her, but she also spurned me, so I threatened to kill her and her mother. And then I met my Henriette again. Henriette, I became so desperate. I even threatened to kill myself if she would not see me.
So I was saying the word wrong, documentary, sorry. Goya, right? This is a Spanish painter, and this would be a romantic painting. And there's this element of spookiness going on here, right? What is that? Gee. Okay, Program Symphony, a multi-movement orchestral composition that tells a literary story. And here, Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique has 5 movements, and we're going to sample the 4th and the 5th movement incompletely. Again, his infatuation with this actress. The Dies Irae, which we've heard several times in Mozart's Requiem and also in Fauré's Requiem. So the 5 movements. But I want to have this little presentation by Leonard Bernstein, the music teacher and the composer for Bernstein's West Side Story. We watched that in the theater section. Anyway, he talks about the Idée fixe here in the melody. All right, here, pay attention.
Quote, even the beloved one herself, the one who's made him lovesick, has become for him a melody, like a fixed idea which he hears everywhere, always returning. Unquote. A fixed idea, remember that. In French, idée fixe. In other words, an obsession. And you all know what an obsession is. It's something that takes hold of your mind and won't let go. Well, in this symphony, the obsession is Berlioz's beloved, she who has made him so desperately lovesick. She haunts the symphony. Wherever the music goes, she keeps intruding, interrupting, returning in endless forms and shapes. So you can see that if we're going to understand anything about this weird symphony, the first thing we have to know is that idée fixe melody, the theme of the beloved, and be able to recognize it each time it appears, no matter how it's disguised. Here it is, or at least the first phrase of it. That's the first phrase. Can you hear the lovesick yearning in that melody? The way it has a rising shape at the beginning, and then rising even higher, straining still further, and then even further, and then hopelessly collapsing. Isn't that a perfect musical picture of lovesick longing? Now listen to it again, this time letting it continue into its second phrase, and then its third, fourth, and so on, each time rising and straining further and further, and each time again falling back into despair. I'm sure that any of you who has ever had a crush on someone who didn't return your feeling will understand that passionate melody perfectly, and you can easily see how a lovesick musician could become obsessed by it.
So again, the text has a sampling movements 4 and 5, March to the Scaffold and A Dream of the Witches. But I want to play quickly each one of the appearances of the Idée fixe from each movement. So here is how the Idée fixe appears in the first movement. Second movement, it appears like this. And we call it orchestration, how the melody has changed. Now, in the fourth movement, we're going to sample the whole thing in a minute or two here. He takes drugs, and he believes that he has killed this lady, and that he is sentenced to death, and he's marching to the scaffold, the guillotine, bam, right where they chop your head off. And notice that it builds up to a point, and then there's this pause, and it's like his head is in the guillotine, and then you hear the orchestra go boom, ding, boom, and it's the guillotine coming down and his head falling into the basket. Of course, leave it to the French to invent a machine to execute somebody with the least amount of pain. And the last movement, the story is that it's a witch's Sabbath, and the melody now appears played by an E-flat clarinet, a small clarinet, and it's all twisted and distorted and witch-like. So, and this piece of music is very popular around Halloween, actually. Okay, now this is the complete fourth movement, Fantastique from Hector Berlioz, written in 1830. the fifth movement. And this is Leonard Bernstein, the same piece, right? On the Idée fixe. So there you have it. Review. What is program music, right? Instrumental music endowed with literary or pictorial associations, especially popular in the 19th century, the Romantic period. Absolute music. What is that? Music that has no literary, dramatic, or pictorial program. It's also called pure music. Idée fixe. What is that? The French word. Fixed idea, term coined by Berlioz for recurring musical ideas that links different movements of a work. We still use that word to this day. Okay, program symphony, right? A program symphony, which was the Symphonie Fantastique, a piece of music for orchestra or other large ensemble which allows or follows the form of a symphony. Several movements contrast between slow and fast, use of the sonata allegro form, and is usually named as a symphony, right? Is also programmatic. It tells a story, certain imagery, or tell a certain story. And Beethoven's Sixth Symphony is considered to be a program symphony. It's called the Pastoral Symphony. Richard Strauss's Sinfonia Domestica is a program symphony. There are not a lot of program symphonies that you could cite as examples. Other ones, program symphonies. Okay, so that concludes chapter 41, Hector Berlioz and his Symphonie Fantastique.